Okay, welcome everyone to another session of Breakfast and Learn, and special welcome, as I said before, to Rabbi Mason from Muswell Hill. And over to you, Rabbi Mason, for some words of Torah or whatever.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Stephen. Lovely to be here with the Rabbi who has preceded me at Muswell Hill and lived in this very house. That's really nice, and I know Rabbi Lister has high regard for Muswell Hill and has warm thoughts about it as a part of the rabbinic growth. And Rabbi Lister did very great things here in this community, which I can only hope that I built on over the last years I've been here. But it's nice to be here with you. Some faces I recognize here. Definitely lovely to see you all, and yeah, be with you. And I think this is also testament to the lessons of COVID, that we can do this sort of thing. On the one hand, we'd prefer not to have had the pandemic. I think we all would have been happy to go back to early 2020 and have a different 2 years, but at the same time, to be able to fit this in our day, for me to have come out to Edgware, for a 15-minute slot from Muswell Hill, from the wilds of Muswell Hill, would have been very hard to fit into the day, even if it's not the wilds, the 20 minutes up the road, the 20 minutes back, yeah, we miss the schmoozing, I suppose. We get the schmoozing and the breakfasts, the actual real breakfast. But to be able to do this, I think also has positive upsides to it as well. So again, thank you very, very much. Given that we have Tu B'Shvat upcoming, I wanted to actually focus on some values in relationship to our world, to our environment, and touch on some work I'm doing in that area, and look at one or two values, Jewish values, Torah values that connect and inspire relating to this area as well. Because I think the protection of our climate is becoming more of a conversation than probably it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago. We're all more aware of the crisis that is affecting the climate. We're all more aware through our media of what's going on, what politicians are doing, what's happening globally. COP26, right? We all know. We might not understand why a Yiddish term was used for a global conference, right? What's COP doing in the environment, right? But we all heard about it, and so I think, given that what we have with Tu B'Shvat is almost the working together of halacha and nature. So our understanding, in a sense, of halacha is that it connects to our world, that there's nothing really in the world that lives without being impacted on by halacha. So I know we talk often mystically about Tu B'Shvat, and we grew up thinking about the birthday of the trees. We know in the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah, it's talked about as the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot. It's the new year. It's the tax year. It's the year of move over for tithing of produce from the tree. And a lot of time in the Gemara and Rosh Hashanah is spent talking about different species of vegetable and tree, and when is their tax year, so to speak. In other words, the trees, the environment around us, is not free from halachic consideration. And I think my approach would probably be that halacha elevates the natural world, right? It is the vehicle, the path through which we are able to give respect to the natural world. Our lens for doing that is Eretz Yisrael, because of course the place where halacha generates this relationship really is Eretz Yisrael, because there are a number of mitzvot that are dependent on the land, that are connected to the land: tithing, sabbatical year, leaving the corners of the field. They're connected, of course, to the land. But we know also that there are values connected to what we consume as people. We are consuming individuals, right? We consume from the world. We're allowed to do that. That's something we could even consider a mitzvah to do, possibly. But there are commandments that are connected to our consumption. Now, that's an interesting word to use, the word consumption. We know that God in creation tells us, right, to multiply, right, to fill the world with our species. Having children is also connected to the idea that God did not want to create a waste in this world. He wanted to actually settle the world. He wanted people to fill the world. And he wanted us also to conquer it, right? Kivshuha is the word used in Bereshit, conquer it. But what I find interesting is that when God places Adam in the Garden of Eden, right? He places Adam in the Garden of Eden, right? Le'ovda u'leshomra, right? To work the garden and to keep it, to nurture it, maybe preserve it. And I think that's quite interesting because there are two values going on here. One, working the land is, I think, to extract from the land. We need to extract from creation what we need. And that extraction has grown quite a lot in the last 100 to 150 years as technology's grown, right? Our consumption's grown because we can get more fish. We can transport more produce, right? There are more people to consume more goods, more food. So we need to extract more food from the land. Now, we're not told that's a problem. Le'ovda, to work the garden. Adam was put in to work the garden. But there's another value there, which is the value u'leshomra, to preserve it. And I think that means that we are bid by God here to make a balance between what we extract from the land, from the world, and our needs to preserve the world. And if those two go out of balance, that is negative. And that can happen both ways, by the way, because it could be that we are so ascetic, as they say, we so worry about consumption that we underconsume, right? We leave God's world, we don't want to touch it. It's God's world, nothing to do with us. That's not a Jewish approach, right? We're told, aren't we, about blessings. Now, the Talmud says that, you know, when you take food, you must say a blessing, a bracha. And a person who eats something without saying a bracha, it's as if, the Gemara firstly says it's like you've stolen. And then the Gemara says, it can't be you've stolen. It's as if, you're not stealing, but it's as if one has stolen. God places it for our use. As long as we recognize the creator, then we're given that right to extract and to benefit from God's world. That's okay. So we shouldn't stand back from consumption. That's good, that's okay. But at the same time, if we overconsume, if we take too much fish from the sea, if we overforest because we want to satisfy our needs to consume, if we have too much meat consumption, and that's one of the big things that the environmental world talks about, is do we eat too much meat? I don't think the question should be actually whether it's right to eat meat or not. I don't think that's actually, maybe irrelevant's a bit too harsh, and I'll come back to that maybe as well. But I don't think the question is about whether it's right or wrong to eat meat, but it's a question of, do we understand what it is when we have so much meat being consumed, and what that means for the areas of livestock, for the transportation of the meat, for the methane emissions, let's say, which are endangering for the atmosphere from massive amounts of livestock. So it's that thinking, I consume, but how can I make that a balance between my consumption, right? What we extract, le'ovda, the avodat ha'adama, the working of our planet, of our land, and l'shomra, and the need to preserve it. Because we know, obviously, if we over-extract, we don't have for the next generation. And we know now that that extraction and consumption is also endangering our climate as well. So that's one value, which I think is really big because it comes from the story of creation. And I think the story of creation is more than a story. It's almost an essential laboratory of understanding of our world. Things that happen are not just stories, but we learn them as kids as stories because that's the way we need to enter. But when we're being told that it's not good for man to be alone, Adam needs a partner, right? And that's Chava, this woman figure. That's more than a story. That's an essential statement about humanity. That's something clearly about humanity. And so I would say the same here about Adam being placed in the Garden of Eden to work the land. Yes, go ahead, Adam, go and extract, go and take what you need to survive as a species, but don't overdo it. Make sure you sustain and preserve it at the same time. And I think that leads to a sense that we all have, or a value that we all have. And I know that our chief rabbi talks about this a lot, and it was in his initial induction speech when he became a chief rabbi, now I think 7.5 years ago, which I can't quite believe. And that is responsibility. We have a statement in Judaism, Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh. All of Israel are responsible for one another, really, in a sense, are guarantors for the other. Arvut is a sense of more than responsibility, is really seriously putting oneself in the place of the other and wanting the other to flourish as well. So, it can be understood in a negative way, right? This sense of responsibility. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai explains it through a famous story, you may well have heard of it, of a boat. And people are sailing on a boat, and one individual is boring a hole underneath his seat while the boat is at sea. And all the others on the boat say to this individual, but what you're doing is damaging, you're going to bring us down. And says this individual, well, it's my seat. I will do what I want under my seat. So this is the ultimate early libertarian, right? We talk about all the debates around COVID, right? Should we, lock down or not, or restrictions or not, or freedom or not? Think about the comparison between the person boring a hole under their seat and the individual not taking the vaccine out of choice. They can say, well, it's my body. I'll do what I want. It's my seat. I can damage if I want to, because, I've got other means of survival. I'm strong in this boat. I can swim ashore, whatever. But of course, we know that people who do not take the vaccine for COVID, not talking about other vaccines, because, there are other vaccines maybe people have choice over, we don't know, but certainly for COVID now, what that can do by not taking it and getting ill and being a burden on the National Health Service can be damaging for others. And so there's a lack of that person putting themselves in the place of, I don't know, the NHS nurse who has to do long shifts and has to sweat to do her work and support those who are ill. There's a lack of being able to put oneself in the position. So that's quite important when we also apply. And by the way, there are clear connections between, I suppose is a strong word, between the pandemic and our relationship to our planet. Because there are people, and David Attenborough is one of them, who are writing about becoming closer to nature. And China is a good example, when there is so much development in nature, where we come closer to different species of animals, where there are exotic tastes of different animals, it's easier for viruses to jump from these animals to humans. And so, in a sense, there's a balance that's sort of off there between humanity and the species around us. So, there's definitely this person in the boat. We can compare certainly to the person who's not taking the vaccine. We have arvut. This concept's in the Torah, actually, in the personage of Judah, because when they tell Jacob that they want to go down with Benjamin, because this Joseph figure, right, who is the head of Egypt under Pharaoh, sends the brothers back to Jacob to bring the younger son Benjamin. And Jacob worries, of course, that he's going to die, like he thinks he's lost Joseph. Reuven comes forward very, very impulsively and says, my two children, boys, should die if we don't bring him back. It's awful. It's an awful reaction by Reuven. Whereas Judah says, Anochi e'ervenu, right? I will be in his place. I will be a guarantor for him. And we know that's what he does, doesn't he? He offers himself up instead of Benjamin. And that's where we move into Parshat Vayigash, which we learned only a few weeks ago. So there's that concept of responsibility, putting in the other place. And the question is, can we do that? Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. all of Israel are guarantors for one another. Can we expand that as something of the relationship between our people and others? You know, when I went to this COP conference representing an organization called Synagogue, and I'm one of the lead rabbis on Synagogue. It's a cross-communal organization, but we all work within our denominations, as I do within the United Synagogue. And the idea of Synagogue is that we have an environmental audit that people can do and look at ways to develop better practice in communities. How much do we waste in our communities? Not using plastics, turning off the lights, looking at the energy use in our community. Do we have double glazing? If we do a building work, can we put a better heating system in? Some will cost more and will only be relevant at certain times. Some of them, like not wasting, are pretty cheap, really. In fact, they'd probably save us money if we buy less food for Kiddush than we sometimes do. So when I was at COP, I went to Glasgow for this. On the day that Synagogue had a stand in what they called the green zone, we had finished and we were going home. And I went to the big COP26 sign to get my picture. I took my video to send to my shul so that at least knew that I wasn't on a jolly, you know, in Glasgow, you know, out at the pub all day in Glasgow. And I took this video and entourage walks towards me. I was like, well, this is important, but I didn't recognize. And this guy in the middle, smallish guy, I said, so who do you represent? Because I'm getting out of the way now. They're going to have a picture and they look more important than me. There's one of me and 15 of them, right? You know, I might be from Scotland, but I can't, you know, there's a limit. And so who are you? He said, I'm from the United Nations. I said, oh, okay, what's your role? He said, I'm the president. Oh, whoa. Now, this isn't the general secretary that we know of, Gutierrez. This is a guy called Shahid Ahmed, I think his name is, who is the president voted by the nations, so of the actual sitting of the 100 whatever it is nations. But still very important. I get my picture with him, of course, and look him up. This guy was the foreign secretary of the Maldives. The Maldives. That's where he's from. He's very good on anti-Semitism, actually. A really good friend of the Jewish people, actually. And he had been on Newsnight that week talking about how his nation was going to end up underwater. The Maldives as islands would end up being inundated because of the growth over time of sea levels. So do we have, as a people, as a Jewish people, a right to feel that we are also, not just us, but we can feel a sense of responsibility for what goes on there? Now, we're not going to save the Maldives, but we can be part of the changes and even lead forward changes that are going on in more plant-based meat. If we can afford to buy plant-based, you know, burgers and meat. I just saw a hechsher on one or two. There's fries as well is on the list. You can buy, you know, plant-based stuff. That's growing. And I would, by the way, also say that Israel is at the front of leading on technology to help with this stuff too. Which I talked to someone called Rachel Barr, who works in Israel, lives in Tel Aviv. Talked to her yesterday. She works for an organization called UBQ. They produce a technology which can transform waste into this thermoplastic material called UBQ, which can be used in industrial processes and is green neutral. So you're taking waste, which is a methane emitter, and methane is a worse fossil fuel gas. It's worse in its potency than carbon dioxide, even though it stays less in the atmosphere. We can help solve that issue. And I was actually really proud of thinking that Israel is a small country, which on its own cannot obviously solve the climate crisis, but it has a role to play in being a technology provider. So that's really some ideas from me, which I think connect to our sense of responsibility. The world is like that boat. And we're all on this boat together, and we all inhabit different nations, different customs, different ways of life, and they should be protected, right? As the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, was the famous rabbi in Volozhin, the last Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin in the 19th century. He talks about how the relationship between the Jews and other nations is like water to fire. But water is put out by fire. Our water, our fire, I'm sorry, get the right way around. Our fire should render the water drinkable. Our mitzvot, our halacha, should render the world a better place. But if you don't have the pan between, if the water and the fire mix, the water goes out, the fire goes out. Gosh, I got that the wrong way around, didn't I? The fire is put out. Our fire assimilates out. The water remains. You need the pan in between. And the pan says, the Netziv is our difference through mitzvot, our different life. All these places on the boat are acceptable different lives, but all need to consider that how we act can impact on the wider world. And the world we live in now, which is so connected, offers that approach. And that's what we think about at Eco Synagogue. And I know the United Synagogue also is launching soon and is looking at its own projects now, encouraging us to consider and think about the climate. So happy for questions. Do please come and ask me a question, but it's lovely to have spoken with you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Mason. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand and unmute yourself. And I see that the Garbers have their hands up. So
is this family, the Garbers related to a Rabbi Garber or?
Yes,
could be.
Alan is our son.
Love Alan. He was at my wedding. He was actually at my wedding.
Was he?
He was in Chappelle's, and I'd just left Chappelle's. I went to Brovender's in a frat and got married to my lovely wife Elisheva, and he came to the wedding. I've got pictures of him dressed up. So
Wow.
lovely guy.
It's not a question. It's first of all to thank you very, very much.
That's amazing.
Because, you know, we ask questions. Well, I ask questions even amongst our community and outside the community. What do they mean by freedom? And the answer is, well, to do your thing. And to me, being a Jew is about responsibility. And I think that we always talk about rights. It's not our rights, it's what our responsibilities are. And I think, thank you very, very much for helping me to sort of understand the concept of freedom. Thank you.
Sure.
I think you put that really well. And I think at the moment with this pandemic, it's been really difficult to sort of work between responsibility and rights, because we are losing rights through the restrictions. We've had to, but we felt that that's because of our responsibility to help people. And it's been really complicated how to work that out, but you put that very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, going back to COVID and responsibility, I think the United Synagogue should make it mandatory that anyone coming into shul should have had a COVID jab. And I know for a fact there are people in Israel Synagogue who come to shul and refuse to have a COVID jab. And I keep going on about it. And the official line is we can't do anything until it's a mandatory thing from the government. And I think they should look into that.
In Israel, to go into the synagogue, you have to have a green pass, which means you've been vaccinated, full stop. You're not vaccinated, you can't go.
You sure in a shul you need a green pass in Israel? I don't even know. I think we just need to be careful not to go down a route with COVID where we end up creating too much division. So I think and that's not being sympathetic to people who are anti-vax. You know, we've just seen it now with this massive issue in Australian tennis with the
Novak Djokovic. Yeah.
With Novak, yeah, exactly. Where now, you know, there is an argument that was he treated, you know, was this a political move by Australia? Was he treated right? I know the guy is not exactly, you know, stuck for a penny or whatever it is, but there are ways to treat people as well. And so, you know, and there are rights that people might say, yes, I do have a right to pray and to be in a synagogue, and there'll be a feeling that. So yes, to be clear as leaders that it is an obligation or a responsibility maybe to get vaccine. If someone can get it, they really should. And we don't understand why people don't have a vaccine. They're not, unless they have an exemption. It's an issue. And I think, by the way, I think in other religious communities, it's probably more difficult. I'm chair of the Multi-Faith Network in Harringay. And there's certain communities, it's really hard. They've got real issues with it from religious perspectives. I'm sure in your community, I know in mine, most people have had the jab. You know, there'll be the odd few, but most people will have had it. So I don't think we want to be in a situation where we're like, don't talk to them because they haven't had the jab. We want to make it a more carrot than stick.
Yeah.
You know, and be clear that we're leading from the front, that there's a responsibility to be had in having the vaccine. And you have to remember that as time goes on this year, it's very, very possible that this virus is moving towards an endemicity. It'll become more endemic. And I think once it becomes more endemic and less damaging, you know, you're not frightened. I remember in 2020, you know, I'm 48 years old, and I was frightened to get, COVID. You know, you looked at the study, you worried if you got COVID, you know, and I'm 48, you worried if you got it, hopefully I'll be all right. But if I don't get, if I've got that terrible reaction to it and I go to hospital, I worry what will happen. You don't have that feeling now. You less have that feeling now. We're lucky because we've got vaccines in this country, and therefore that helps us. But it will become less severe, and therefore we might less worry about people who are not vaccinated. And we might have other mitigations. We might continue with masks for a long time. I'm sure there will be people wearing masks in shul for quite a long time.
Can I just mention on that point about vaccines? It's not just and to Norman's point about responsibility and duty to do the right thing by other people, but it's also a gross insensitivity to those that may have lost loved ones to COVID. Yes. Not to wear a mask and to do the right thing by other people. It's a matter of sensitivity, and if we have a responsibility one for the other, then I think we should behave in a way that acts with sensitivity to others, and there's a responsibility about that sensitivity as well.
I think, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's, you know, I had a situation in you know, I'll give you an example, and people, different people have got different comfort levels when it comes to this, and that's something that, so, you know, I'm a rabbi of a shul, and like your rabbi, we want people to come back to shul. You know, we believe very much in the location. That, you know, when it comes to davening, it's about being in the place to daven. So we want people to come back. Now, through the winter, if you have the doors open, it's very, very cold, and you're wearing masks. It's not exactly the inviting place. You know, you can't easily sit and chat to your neighbor, right? You know, right? You know, so you know, as an example, I started. There were one or two doors that really very cold air was coming in. We got carbon dioxide monitors. And I shut the door, knowing that, you know, that could be a proxy in some ways for the quality of the air, and if it's below number whatever. But there was one or two members who found that really hard. For them, the optics of shutting the door was a problem for them. That was too much. Even although from a perspective of policy and risk, you know, we had windows at the top open. So, you know, from the ladies' gallery, you know, there was air coming in there. It was just tolerable to be there. But we were being sensible about the level of the quality of the air as well. So it's really difficult because people are making their decisions depending on where their comfort is, and you can't please anyone.
Going back to Israel, it's mandatory. The government made it mandatory to have the green pass before going into synagogues.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Speak
I'm
to
not
Mr.
sure.
Bennett.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't. You know.
Well, I tell you, it just flashed up on my screen.
Oh, you look.
No.
I don't mean. I disagree. I don't mean. I understand that's what the policy is in Israel.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I'm not sure I agree. I'm not sure that policy is necessary. You know, it's hard. I'm not sure I agree with.
Well,
the policy.
They just had 38,000 new cases yesterday in Israel. I mean, it's a small country and it's a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think I love Israel. I made Aliyah and we want to go back there, but I'm not sure that they've dealt with COVID the best.
I agree with you. I'm here and I agree with you.
Oh, you're in Israel?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I don't, even though, you know what, we all have. I just read a book now by a guy called Toby Green called The COVID Consensus. And it was an anti-lockdown polemic. He was quite angry about, now he's not anti-COVID, so he's not a science denier, but his issue is we've got to think about the damage to people that lockdown has done.
Yeah.
Now, what's he saying the alternative is? I don't know. I mean, he's certainly saying that we need mitigations, masks, ventilation, spacing. There were things, but lockdown in his opinion, and he's using proof to bring, meant that the next once you release a lockdown, the virus then came back even stronger.
Correct.
And we've had that in Israel, haven't we, with lockdowns that have been quite severe, and then it comes back. But who knows? Anyway, I know it finishes 9:30.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi Mason. That was very, very interesting, thought-provoking discussion this morning. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And have a good week, everyone. We'll see you again next Tuesday with hopefully another interesting speaker. Have a good day,
Thank you,
everyone.
Stephen. Thank you, Rabbi Lister.
Thank
Lovely
you.
to see you.
Thank you very much.
Regards to you all. Lovely
Thanks.
to see you all. Have a great day.
Bye all.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.